I spent a year making this whole virtual replication of Bora Bora in French Polynesia. And the project in its beginning was really born off actually first the trip I did in Spain, where I was documenting in film and photography different abandoned tourist resorts, and I was documenting the ecosystems that evolved from these tourist infrastructures in different places. So Bora Bora is a similar case, where it's this very iconic postcard-style island, and a lot of the species that we see on it have been imported to kind of build the perfect um, idea or imagination of what a kind of touristic tropical island is. There's a big group of people often behind all these different works, and a lot of them are really active artists working in sound and in music and visuals, like making plants and leaves in the sun and everything. Of course, there's the specific story of French Polynesia, of Bora Bora, of the transformation of a place, of its people, of its economy, because of tourism and these kind of fantasies of landscapes. And that was the original, uh, element behind creating like a fully virtual island. And I've never been to this location very intentionally. It's purely based on external research. Like I filled my studio with pictures of all the different areas on the island from other people through time, and then that became the basis for, this trail, for these signs. Now you're in your virtual body, of course, so you can break certain physical rules. We can teleport. We can move. We can do things that we normally can't. We can still go ahead like through a tree, look at the other side.
You've told me before that you have this idea of kind of like prototyping these new relationships, and that through art you can bring, ecologists, microbiologists together around a subject, and then the arts, its role is almost like a platform of like bringing attention to that.
When you enter a landscape with someone who might have spent like 10, 20, 40 years in this place, at some point they might open up to you and you realize that they have a particular like body language, emotions, way of expressing themselves in relationships to different species and part of this landscape. Once you build this kind of world, it is more, you can kind of invite someone in, a scientist, another collaborator, and they are themselves, but they're also very much connected to or responding to a specific context, story, or environment where they can be themselves and within that.
So the book that I wrote was called Playing Nature, Ecology in Video Games. And it was really a deep dive into thinking about contemporary games, primarily digital ones, and how they represent natural environments and processes. And some of it is a critique, because I think a lot of these contemporary digital environments replicate some of the worst instrumental relations that we have with the natural world. So thinking of it as a resource simply to be used, or as in this case, it's actually and similar in the sense of a scenic backdrop that really is sort of incidental to human action in the landscape. So, but there's a lot of that, and but I think also at the same time, I just am someone who loves to play games, and I see a lot of potential there for games to model complex ecological systems and relationships, and also to maintain a playful attitude, which I think is actually very necessary in our sort of toolkit for thinking about climate crisis.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi, guys.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm just enjoying this beautiful view here.
Yeah, it's good to see you in a virtual space here.
I might just take a seat on this sun lounger.
Oh yeah.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
For the next while.
On the Art Collector's Island, you could see all the wonders of the South Seas. Waves always lapped gently against the beach. The sky was ever blue. Yet the island was so artfully rendered and stretched so far that not even the animator had been to all its corners. In the jungle, you could see the strangest orchids. Monkeys howled from the canopy. And if you kept on walking, a path led up through the hills to a caldera lake that was deep and blue. Old trees were mirrored in the water, and among the branches lived an oo bird who sang so wistful a mating call that even a young gamer playing a tournament late at night, stopped his game and listened when he heard the OO calling from the open tab. Holy shit, what a beautiful song.
When I started making these works back in like art school, I was building virtual landscapes, and then I was making paintings of these landscapes because I was brought up thinking in art school that like, oh, as an artist, you conceptualize, you theorize, you make work about something. But then as soon as I stopped, I was like, I'm just going to build virtual worlds instead of painting them. And this is kind of where my career, everything started as well. So I like to use all these effects to draw you in, to move you, to kind of weave you through different transformations. But in the work, I never intentionally try to spell it out too much. Really try to use the tools that are already being used in our culture, but in film and games and everything, but use them for a different purpose. This whole island is made of around 30,000 individual trees and plants. But each of these plants are kind of randomized, like throwing a dice by the computer. And then it populates, like I didn't really put this plant here. It's the computer put all this stuff here based on different variables. So it shuffles actually a very few identical objects. So it's like this palm looks different than the one behind Ben, but it's actually the same. The one behind has just been offed a little bit, rotated, changed in size. So in most video game and virtual spaces, you're actually replicating a few things. So that's like 30,000 plants on the island, but I only made 30. So they're replicated 1,000 times. And this is a little bit similar to how we are actually changing landscapes because of tourism, so that landscapes start looking like our imagination of a place.
What is happening in here, Jakob?
It's the room of broken physics. So, you know, when you spend really a lot of time building a virtual environment, it's nice to keep a bit of fun and a bit of funk in there. So this is like a tourist hut where everything's floating. And again, one of these like photographs that I've taken of other tourist infrastructures in other resorts and kind of documenting the landscapes are floating in the air in here.
Once upon a time, people heard a rumbling above and below the ground. The sun and moon turned red, blue, and yellow, and wild beasts mingled fearlessly with man. A month later, they saw darkness ascending from the earth to the sky, accompanied by a roar and by thunder and heavy rain. Everything was in a dreadful confusion. Some people lost themselves, some died without knowing why. The water rose to cover the earth, and people took refuge in the highest trees.
We have the mountain in the background, very iconic from Bora Bora. Then we have like a drawing of a mosquito, an ink drawing I made 5 years ago. It's the actual drawing. It's like 2.5 meters, because mosquitoes does not exist on Bora Bora. Maybe they do now. They did not, at least officially, 6 years ago. And it's common on a lot of tropical islands that there are no mosquitoes until they get, you know, they arrive with some kind of transportation, be it via goods like, you know, these water bottles or via tourism. The whole work, you know, plays also with fantasy, science fiction, a collage of kind of timescales, the different perspectives on a single place. And this one is based, like the actual location where we are right now virtually. Like if you were to zoom out from the island and look down on this actual spot, there's a real airport on Bora Bora, and this airport was built by the American Army to create a base against the Japanese. And over here you kind of see different photographs that they've taken of these barracks and bases. This location is based on, you know, someone else who actually went to this spot. He took photos of this spot, then uploaded them to Reddit, this online forum. And then I get hold of those images, then build this location. Then Mikkel goes to this location 5 years ago, and now it's part of like a fictional story of these multiple worlds that you're kind of overlapping.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that's so important about Jakob's work, and a thing that's often missed when we talk about these virtual worlds, is to like kind of go beyond that binary of what's the real world and what's the virtual world, and kind of focus a bit more on how they interact and how they're entangled. That the virtual comes back to the real that then is changed, and then the representation of the real is changed in the virtual. So there's this back and forth entanglement going on. And so much of our reality is full of that now.
You very much talked in this conversation about the work being these kind of emotional experiences where you connect with these things. But to what extent do you think it also contributes to a form of kind of preservation? I wouldn't say conservation necessarily.
Right. None of the works I do try to, let's say, mimic reality or replace it. I'm like by no way a kind of techno-utopian person. I just think we live with so much media today that it's a huge shame if we don't try to do something different with it in the realm of art. And within that field, in environmental work, it means that instead of just recreating what is currently being lost in nature, like virtually, just making a tree look like a tree, I try to emphasize a perspective on that tree that a biologist might have. It means with the bats in Hyde Park, for example, we talk to bat experts on how they communicate and use sonar to reflect things in the environment. So instead of just like, as you saw in the work, you don't see a bat. You see sound visualized like a bat that changes and emphasizes how it uses sonar. So all these works I do take a point of view in a landscape, use like real sound, 3D scanned elements, and then change them to emphasize a perspective that's normally outside our bounds of human perception. None of these works are like gonna replace or in and of themselves like preserve nature as such, but they are gonna hopefully draw like a sense of wonderment, emotion to people in a virtual domain that rarely has this kind of perspective within it.
The final question that I want to ask, and I just want you to think about this while we move to the next location, is what is this is a brilliant question, what is the environment like inside your headset?
It's kind of multi-layered and a little bit of cognitive dissonance, because I can say it's tight on my skin, so I can feel that I'll have an indentation on my face afterward. I'm also smelling my partner's burnt toast, so I know something's happening in the household. So it's interesting because I'm paying attention to the visceral experience, but I'm also here with you and enjoying the experience. So
yeah, for me this is Mikkel. I think it's really quite relaxing, like this landscape and the perfect clouds, and it's really cold here in New York today, and it just immediately makes me feel relaxed, like I'm on vacation or something. And there's especially some effect about the clouds up there that it makes my body relax. It looks like such a genuine summer day.
When I try and describe the sensation in VR, it's like one of the hardest things to do, because it feels like being a person, but there's some missing bits. Like I can't feel the wind, and I can definitely smell dinner and all of this stuff, but at the same time, like I'm here. The clouds are very grounding, the water is really grounding, but then there's also the kind of empowerment sensation of being able to be to be able to hop and move.
You have this idea of kind of slow media, and that when you experience the artworks, they also have this kind of sense of slowing down time. Could you say a bit more about what you see a slow media as, and why you think that's important at this moment in time?
I mean, first of all, I think the key to these artwork is emotion. So there's environmental narratives and there's technology. But what's really at stake is a kind of entering something in your mind as a human that changes how you feel. Like you slow down, you become kind of reflective or something. And with slow media, it's a way that I'm designing my projects. So when you create a virtual work, like a virtual forest, you could go with a little team and then you pre-plan everything and you have a specific path through the landscape and you create like what's called photogrammetry. It's like you use cameras to 3D scan different elements and you put them together. So you could travel through this landscape very like pre-planned and put it together. But I tried to do it over like a really long period of time. By having a long kind of timeline, I think that due to a greater extent can reach something that we cannot imagine. So this is really important for these type of artworks to come into the world, that the research, the stories, the starting points, but the final work has to become something that none of the participants can fully imagine until they start creating together.